Welcome back to Team Racing Basics. On this episode, we're going to be looking at a few principles of great starting in team racing. In any sort of sailing racing, starting is really important, and team racing is no exception. Now, starting is a pretty big topic, so in this particular episode, we're going to be looking at some basic principles, some overarching practices, and in future episodes, we're going to look at some specific maneuvers and how to respond in specific situations. But for now, we're going to be looking at the basic ways that you can get your boat on the line, moving fast, and with your opponents behind you. The first and most important principle of team racing starting is going to be what guides all of the other principles within a team racing start, and really what sets it apart from fleet racing starts. When you're fleet racing, any advantage that you gain is an advantage for you, but when you disadvantage other boats, that doesn't really help you. Whereas team racing is what in maths we would call a zero-sum game, which means in a zero-sum game, anything which your opponent loses is your win. This means that aggressive or maneuvers which attack your opponent are directly beneficial for you, because if your opponent starts in a worse place or at a worse time, if they're late, if they're spinning, if they have a penalty, if they're over the line, these directly benefit you. Because there are only two teams, you and them, and that means that anything which is bad that happens to the other team directly benefits you. Whereas in a fleet race, if you take out one of the boat, that's going to provide such a small benefit to you if there are 48 other boats who all have great starts. This directly leads us into what the goal of our starts is when we're team racing. And the goal of our starts when we're team racing is that we want to be in a better position than our opponents. We want our team to be placed on the line in a better place than the opponent boats. We want to be on more towards the biased end. We want to be not controlled. We want to be sailing faster. And this means that we still need to be on time. We still need to be moving fast, but we also need to be in control of our opponents and preventing them from being where they want to be. The other big difference between team racing and fleet racing and starting is that in team racing, we have a team. And this means that we need to work hard to make sure we're not going to get in each other's way, we're not going to prevent each other from getting a good start, and we're not all going to be competing with our teammates for the favoured end of the line. This leads most teams to break down where they're going to start before the race. So instead of just looking for the biased end, they'll also communicate amongst their teams and have one starter who most commonly will be more towards the pin, a starter who prefers to start towards the middle of the line, and a starter who prefers to start towards the boat end of the line. And this means that when you're lining up, you don't end up getting in each other's ways. You're not fighting with your teammate for the pin end, and you can each seek to control the opposite team. Now, that's not to say that you don't push towards the bias end of the line. If it's a really pin bias line, certainly your boat at middle should be looking to push down. Maybe your boat at boat is looking to come down a little bit too. But these are generally the order of boats that you're going to end up in when you cross the line. And that's going to inform the other decisions you make. Now, if both teams are subscribed to this basic idea of team racing, then quite often you're going to end up with a situation where you end up paired up as you come into the line, which means that maybe the two boats who both want to start at the pin end up in their own little battle almost amongst themselves. The boats in the middle are paired up in a battle, and the boats at the boat are paired up in a battle. Now, boats will come out of their pairs to attack others, but very often you'll see a team racing start with this going on. So if you ever hear the expression that someone's paired up, that means that they're in a one-on-one with that one particular opponent boat. And you should look to always try and win, in inverted commas, win your pair as you approach the line, and that's going to mean that overall your team's going to have a better start than your opponents. And if your team is coming off the line winning 2 out of 3 pairs, that means your team is overall in a winning combination. So that's a good place to be. So how do we win a pair? Well, that depends a lot about where you're starting on the line. Basically, the idea is that to win a pair, you want to be faster than your opponent and in control of your opponent in some kind of way. This will also depend on the conditions. So for instance, if you're starting at the pin, winning your pair might mean that you're further towards the pin than they are, if it's a pin bias line, and that maybe they're on your hip, so as you come off the line, they're going to lose speed and fall off. Similarly, you'll also win the pin if they've gone in too early and you've pushed them so they've had to cross the line, and now you're bang on time and they're over the line, and they might have to jibe around the pin and come back again, and they're going to be late. Another way you might win the pin is if they're below their lay line for the pin and they can't quite make it over the line. So they're going to have to slow down, they're going to have to put in a double tack maybe, or tack underneath the rest of the fleet, and again, they're going to be late. So those are the ways you might win the pin. Similarly at the middle, more often than not, at the middle, you're going to want a boat underneath you to win your pair. So if they're down here, then that's a really bad place, because they're going to be in your bad wind, they're going to be in bad wind off the boats at the pin, and they're going to really quickly want to look to tack out. But in a different circumstance, if it's pin biased, it might be better to have them on top of you again, where they're going to slide off as you accelerate off the start line, provided that you've got good speed off the line. Similarly, again, you might be able to push them over the line. At the middle, it's much easier to push yourself over the line when you're trying to get someone else over the line, because it only takes a very small amount of overlap to end up in the wrong place. And this is also going to mean that even if they are over, they're right on top of you, which means that you're going to be slow coming off the line. The final position is if you're at the boat end of the line. To win your pair, you're going to want them underneath you, which means that they're going to be in your bad wind, you're going to be controlling when they can tack, you're going to be controlling when the rest of the fleet can tack, and you're going to be on starboard right at the boat. There are very few situations where it's going to be better to have a boat inside you at the boat end, so normally you want to be right up there. Another great way to win the boat is that you push your opponent above the boat end of the line, because there's no room given at starting marks, so there's no way for them to force their way in there. If they end up overlapped with you a few seconds to go, they're going to be forced to sail above that start boat, and then they're going to be really late because they're going to have to tack and jibe round. So now we can work our way backwards and work out how can we get into these winning controlling positions on the line. Now, one key thing you might have noticed from what I previously said is that for almost all of these, you're going to be in a much better place if you're going fast at go. Which means that in general, when you're team racing, the line looks a little bit different than in fleet racing. Because you want to be going fast and you want a boat with a certain size of overlap on you, it's not good to sit near the line, hover, and then accelerate right before go, because it makes you a sitting duck for other boats to come in and take control of you. Generally, when you're team racing, you're going to want to be hovering further back from the line. You're going to be in one-on-ones on one of the starboard lay lines as you approach the line, and you're going to accelerate at maybe 10 seconds to go rather than 4 or 5 seconds to go, and coming up to full speed, hitting the line at full speed or close to it. Similarly, you might be able to control your opponent all the way into the line and realize you're a little bit early, and then you're going to need to slow your speed and then re-accelerate quickly. But you'll never really find yourself in a situation where it's beneficial to be hovering right on the line, as it makes you a very easy target for other opponent boats. Because you'll often be approaching the line from a long way out in a one-on-one situation with another boat, one aspect of starting that's really important when you're team racing is lay lines. Early on, before your starting gun goes, it's great to have a look at where your lay lines are to try and get an idea of how high you can point and be able to identify from a long way out where your lay line is. And that's going to dictate where you turn up and where you start pushing towards the line. Now, in team racing, because it's this zero-sum game, you'll also find that sometimes opponents want to take you out, or that you want to take an opponent out, and this makes certain parts of the line more dangerous than others. So, for instance, if you're over in this part of the starting area, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because this means that any boat who's coming across on starboard is going to be able to bounce you as you reapproach on port away from the line. And that's going to make it really hard for you to get a good start. So you never really want to end up in this area at all at any point in the starting sequence, unless it's a particularly strange start. Similarly, as you do your final approach at a minute to go, this is a really good place to be, because with a minute to go you can be on your lay line, controlling another boat or attacking another boat, and that's going to give you a lot of power. Earlier on in the start, you might find yourself around the start line where you're working out where the lay lines are, you're assessing your time and distance, but later on you want to stay away from that area because you want to come back into this funnel to be able to approach the line on starboard tack. When you're over here, if you're too high, that can also make you a threat, because it's going to prevent you dipping below the starting boat, and an opponent can luff you high above the starting boat. It's going to make you a lot easier to control, and if they need to kill time, they can just sail nice and low. And if you try and go above them, they'll luff you. And if they try and go below you, well, they get to kill even more time as they sail down into this nice area where they can then go towards the start. So up here is a bad place to be late on in the start. And this area over here is going to be an okay place to be, particularly between 3 minutes and 2 minutes to go, which is going to be where you're going to be setting up your maneuvers before you go into this one-on-one on your final approach. So you really need to think about where you are in relation to other boats and how easy it is for another boat to attack you in the start. Because if you're too high, if you're on port, you're going to be a bit of a sitting duck for opponents. And if you can predict your opponent's moves early, it's going to make it much easier for you to prevent them and protect yourself against them. Something you see really often when people are quite new to team racing, or when they're reaching an intermediate level of team racing, is that they'll be really, really aggressive in the pre-start. So what's important to remember when you're attacking an opponent boat, it's important to remember what you're trying to achieve with it. Because if it's 1 minute 40 to go and you're just trying to give them a penalty, that probably won't actually help your start. And if you give them a penalty, they might end up spinning, and then they're completely out of your control. So that's not much use to you. So a really key principle when we're thinking about starting is not over-attacking, not over-match racing our opponents. We want to think strategically about how we can cause them difficulties which are going to directly benefit us. How can we make them be in a worse position? Not just how can we give them penalties or how can we put them in the wrong place. We need to think bigger picture and work out exactly where we want to be and how to prevent them getting into the places where we want to be. My final starting tip, and also my favourite starting tip that I tell to absolutely everyone, is about what to do when things start to go wrong. And it's quite unrelated to all the other starting tips I've given, but I think it's really important, and it's what really separates a lot of intermediate teams from some of the top teams. And it can really, really rapidly improve your team's results. And this tip is just that some of the top teams know when they're going to lose, and they know all the escape routes to be able to turn a bad start into an okay start. So for instance, if you're going to get locked out at the boat end of the line, and this happens all the time, I normally start at the boat end. When things go wrong, you might get locked out. But if you realise you're going to get locked out at 15 seconds to go, that gives you time to put a circle in. You can tack, you can jibe, you can be ready to go. And you might be starting directly behind your opponent, not in too awful a situation, ready to tack off as you come past the boat. It gives you options and you're still in the race. But if you hang in there thinking, well, maybe they're going to bear away and push down the line, I think they're a little bit early, ooh, what could happen? Well, what might happen there is that at 5 seconds to go, you're going to be forced above the boat. And now it's going to be go, they're on the line going fast, and you still need to put in your tack and your jibe to get back round. So when you're starting, you always need to think about super early, what can I do if things go wrong, and how can I turn a bad start into an okay start so I can stay in the race and help my teammate, and use all those other skills that you've learned when you've been practicing, such as sailing fast and good tacking, good jibing, to be able to work your way back into a bad race. Because if you only ever plough straight into bad situations and stay there, you're never going to turn those 50-50 races into 60-40s. Because as soon as something goes wrong, you're always going to lose, because you're going to throw away all your chances to be in the race. And especially at the beginning of the race, it's never good to gamble on big things. You always want to play the percentages and make less risky decisions, because you've got a whole race course to capitalise on those and try again if it doesn't work out. And you can save the risky things which you want to do, the Hail Marys, for the final beat. Similarly, when people are new to team racing, they can often forget some of the most important basics of starting, which is thinking about line bias, and which end they want to be at, whether they want to be under their opponent or on top of their opponent, and similarly, time distance and how long they have to go. Because if you're late to the start, even if you've won your pair, that's going to give your opponents more options to convert you back in. So it's really important that we always keep an eye on time and try and be on the line moving fast. This is particularly true in 3-boat team racing, because in 3-boat team racing there's a big focus on the front of the race, because 8 out of 10 of the winning combinations in a 3-boat team race involve first place. So you want as many opportunities for your winning pairs to get first place as possible on the line. So if you've won your pair, you need to be at the line to then give your team the chance to get a 1. So my overall recommendation from today's episode is to go back and talk with your team using these principles about some systems you can put in place to help you achieve the things we've discussed in this video. So for instance, if you don't already, you should absolutely have a plan with your team about who starts where on the line. Similarly, you should have a plan about what kind of time puts you in what kind of region of the starting line. So for instance, between 3 minutes and 2 minutes, it might be okay to be near the line, checking your ley lines, getting in control of other boats. Between 2 minutes and 1 minute, you might be sailing away from the line in that nice region we were talking about before, on port tack, where it's going to be hard to control you because you're pushing away from the line and no one can push you past the pin end here into that nasty zone. And then in that 1 minute to go, you're going to be looking to be trucking towards the line with speed, controlling your pairs. And if you put these systems in place of rigorously doing things like checking your ley lines, then it's going to make it much easier to action the things you want to do in the start. You can chat with your crew about who's communicating what in the boat, so the helm might be able to focus on the boat-on-boat situation, and the crew is entirely in charge of time and ley lines and feeding that information to the helm and telling them about wind shifts and line biases and how those might change in the final minute, which frees up the helm to focus more on other things. If you have good systems, that's going to prevent you from having to think this stuff out every single start and reinvent the wheel. Talking through these tactics as a team is also going to help you work out how you can help each other start. So when an opponent is attacking one of you, another one knows when they can come and help, when they don't need to help. And if you communicate this before you get on the water and talk about your systems of communication, then that's going to enable you to work out when you need to help, when you need to hang back, and when you need to get involved to make sure the race goes your way. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Team Racing Basics and found some useful tips to take back to your team to be able to plan your starts better. Next time we're going to look at some important pre-starting manoeuvres, such as when to lead and when to follow, and how to tail, and how to push boats over and escape bad starts. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to make sure you don't miss the next one, and look forward to seeing you all soon.